fastball up there, mistaken location, and he is going to pay.
The latest iteration in the show franchise continues what many baseball fans consider to be the best baseball game currently available. Unfortunately, since the show is developed by Sony's San Diego studios, it's really limited to baseball fans who also happen to have a PlayStation. Despite that single console limitation, right away we were impressed with the incredible detail that went into the ballparks. For example, take a look at this shot here. Notice the scoreboard in center field just underneath the Boston sign. If you look closely, you'll not only see the current pitcher and batter, but also stats like balls and strikes. And really all of that updates. So here's another shot where you can see everything on there has been swapped out. The player images, the pitch count, the balls and strikes, and so on. It's a really great attention to detail that can often get overlooked by a lot of sports games. Not so in MLB 14, the show. Of course, not everything had that same attention to detail. So in this shot, notice how the player's uniform has a name and number on their back. But when he gets a hit, take a look at the player on the top right-hand side in the HUD. Notice how the player's name and number have disappeared. Now, what's interesting about this, and we probably would have noticed it otherwise, is that it's clearly not the same uniform for everyone in that little HUD element. For example, if you look at this shot with different teams playing, you can see the player's uniform changes depending on what team is hitting. Considering the amount of detail everywhere else, we would have loved to have seen that level of detail be extended into areas like this and just push it a little bit further. Granted, the player's name would be really hard to read on that little screen, but even if you could see the player's number, that can go a long way to helping with the gameplay itself. After all, not all the players are the same speed, so if you know number 4 is your catcher, then you could just glance at the number and see that you may not want to try to stretch a bloop single into a double. While we found it seemed to be impossible to start a game after the sun went down, we really liked how the lighting would change throughout night games. So here in this shot is how a night game starts. Then as the game progresses, the sky gets darker and the lighting on the field really becomes more noticeable as the stadium lights turn on. It doesn't really affect the gameplay itself at all, but it's a cool little touch that definitely helps add realism to the game. Now, since we're talking about adding realism, if you've been to any sporting event, what are some of the things that you remember the most? There's the sights, which is the game itself, of course, but there's also the sounds. Sound can go a long way to help transport you from your living room to the ballpark. We were really impressed with the way that the sound changes depending on what's happening on the field. So here we're playing in the Boston Red Sox home field of Fenway Park. Listen to what happens when the hometown team grounds into a double play.
Now a hard-hit ball back up the middle. Bare-handed for one. On to first, and Middlebrooks grounds into a double play.
And that's a huge double play there from a pitcher's point of view. You've got to...
Did you hear those boos? Now think about what they had to do. You had to know that it was the hometown team batting, that it was a play that was probably not ending up in a good result, and then it actually had to go through and play a different sound clip. Really nice touch. The devs at Sony obviously know that a day at the ballpark isn't always about what you can see. Now that they've got the sights and sounds down, maybe the next step is the smells of the game, like hot dogs and beer. Okay, so maybe we're not quite ready for smell-o-vision yet. While the sights and sounds can be really helpful to get you immersed into the game, in MLB 14, the show, there's 2 big types of stadiums you'll play at. Up until now, we've looked at the Major League stadiums, and as you can tell, they look and sound great. But then there's the minor league stadiums. So here's a shot in a minor league stadium. Right away, you can tell there's not nearly the level of detail that's been added to the minor league stadiums that are in the major league stadiums. But listen to this and see if you can spot the same strangeness that we did.
Ball hit hard on the ground is short. And the throw to first is in time, but the damage has been done as the side is retired.
Did you hear that? It sounds like the same sort of crowd reactions as the Major League stadiums from just before, didn't it? Except did you notice there's almost no fans in the minor league stadium? And yet those few fans seem to be able to make just as much noise as a packed Major League ballpark. Now, if you've ever been to a minor league game as opposed to a Major League game, you'll know there's a big difference. So it's sort of strange. Okay, so let's go back to that clip one more time and listen to that. But then right after that clip, I'll play another clip from a different minor league game. Listen to the differences in the crowd noise.
Ball hit hard on the ground is short. And the throw to first is in time, but the damage has been done as the side is retired. His first shot at it here. Runners on first with one down. Hard hit ball. Caught down there at third.
So as you can tell, there's quite a bit of inconsistency between the people in the stands and really how much noise they make. But what's nice, even though it can be strange at times to have the roar of the crowd that doesn't seem to exist, it's pretty cool that the devs aren't using the exact same crowd noises for every stadium, as you can tell between the differences in the two clips that we just played. Now, most of the time, you're actually probably going to be playing in a major league park, so playing to a packed house makes a ton of noise, probably not going to notice those differences. All right, so let's move on to some of the modeling. In this next shot, notice the geometry penetration on the batter's left shoulder. Now, that'd be the arm on the right side of the screen by the team logo on the shirt. Now, you can tell the geometry of the sleeve is penetrating the shirt itself. Or in this shot, where you can easily tell that the top of the batter's sleeves are floating above his arm. This might have looked great in a bind pose, but in a batting stance, it can start to look a little bit strange. And yes, it can kind of go between the animation itself causing that penetration or the modeling itself. But when there's not any sort of cloth simulations on the players' uniforms, the sleeves can just float there through the swing, and you can get a lot of that penetration. We really would have liked to have seen some of that be taken into account in the modeling itself. And then there's stuff like this. It's really funny when it happens, but realistically, it probably would never happen in a game, and if you're playing against someone, it can be pretty frustrating. I mean, watch as the third baseman gets the ball, and the runner literally just runs right through his arm and rounds the base to go home. And then the animation for the catcher to get the ball completely ruins any chance of tagging the runner out at home. Stuff like this is a great example of how sometimes the wrong animations playing at the wrong time can get in the way of good gameplay. Then again, sometimes it's the animations that make good gameplay. So the last thing I wanted to point out is something that really just about every sports game has to tackle, and MLB 14 The Show is no different. That is the recreation of real people. Now, as every 3D artist knows, it's a lot easier to create fictional characters than it is to recreate a real person and to actually capture that likeness, especially if that person is really well known, like most sports stars are these days. I'm not just talking about the model itself. That's really hard enough as it is, but in a game like this, a huge part of the realism comes from how each real-life player swings the bat or throws the ball. So here we're looking at just a few of the many, many different batting stances for some of the players. Well, I'll admit I didn't go in and actually compare every single animation side by side with the real person swings. There are quite a few of the big name players that I'm familiar with and I've seen play, and they look pretty spot on here. So I'd be willing to bet that if you look up the actual real player's batting stance and the swing, they look incredibly close to what they have here. Sure, motion capture helps get the animations headed in the right direction, but as any animator will tell you, motion capture doesn't magically do everything for you. Especially when, depending on contracts and licenses and all that kind of stuff, sometimes you're not even able to actually get the actual player to do a motion capture session for you. So sometimes you'll have to fake that. Now, we don't really know which players were able to get motion capture and which weren't. But the point here is that the amount of work to be able to recreate the real-life animations for so many different players is just crazy. Now, in the end, sports games certainly aren't for everyone, but with the summer in full swing, MLB 14 The Show is an incredibly fun game that any baseball fan is bound to enjoy. Even with the single platform limitation and a few minor technical issues here and there, it's really not enough to detract from how fun it is to go head-to-head in the big game or build your own player and watch them rise through the ranks of the minor leagues before getting called up to the big show.